Now it's going to be, okay.
Welcome. Welcome. I'm Gail Sassnett. Wow, I think it's because this is here. Let me move this. I'm Associate Director of the Bob Graham Center for Public Service, and it is a real privilege for us tonight to have David Filipov with us. At the end, we will have time for audience Q&A, and you see the microphone here, which is giving me feedback, and you may come here. We ask you to please come here to the microphone to ask your questions, because we are streaming and recording this, and we need to hear the question. I also am going to ask you to turn off your cell phones. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn the microphone over to Dr. Michael Gorham, who is the one who found David Filipov, and he will introduce our speaker and thank our co-sponsors. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Gorham. I'm a professor of Russian Studies in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Mr. David Filipov, who will be speaking to us today about getting Russia right in the era of fake news. First off, though, Mr. Filipov's visit to UF has been made possible by the generous support of the Bob Graham Center, UF Russian Studies, the UF International Center, UF Learning Without Borders, the College of Journalism and Communications, UF Center for Humanities in the Public Sphere, the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, and the Department of Political Science. And we're enormously grateful to all of them for helping make this event possible. Fewer news topics have been as prone to misconception as Russia, Putin, and their relationship to the United States, warped by years of lingering Cold War stereotypes, Russia's own penchant to shape information to suit its own needs, and an increasingly polarized American political landscape in which the label of fake news has become a tool for questioning the very existence of objective, verifiable truths. Perspectives on Russian-U.S. relations have become fraught with anxiety and uncertainty at a moment when the global community can ill afford it. Who is Vladimir Putin? How powerful and popular is he? Who are his opponents? What are their chances? What does he want for his people and his country? What do Russians want from their leaders? As a former bureau chief of the Washington Post and the Boston Globe, with a decades-long reporter living in Russia and engaging with Russians fluently in their native tongue, David Filipov brings rare insight into these questions. Mr. Filipov previously covered Russia and the former Soviet Union for the Globe from 1994 to 2004. He wrote about Boris Yeltsin's Kremlin, the civil wars in Chechnya, unrest in the former Soviet republics, and the rise of Vladimir Putin. He reported on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. During his tenure at the Globe, Filipov was part of the newsroom team that won the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for breaking news for coverage of the Boston Marathon bombing, as well as an Overseas Press Club award for his 1999 coverage of the war in Chechnya. Filipov has recently returned from Russia and a tour from as the Moscow bureau chief of the Washington Post, where he covered the aftermath of the election of Donald Trump in Russia and the slow descent of the U.S.-Russian relations into something resembling a new Cold War. But he also sought to bring life in his writing to the personal and human side of Russia and the former Soviet Union. Since returning to the States, Filipov has been working on a research project detailing the investigation into alleged Russian election meddling for Russian Matters, a project at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. So please, if you would, join me in welcoming Mr. David Filipov.
Thank you, Dr. Gorham, for saying more cogently in shorter amount of time than I ever possibly could. I'm ready for questions. No, really. I mean, he summed it up. Whenever I do one of these, I take my timer because I know that we have a limited amount of time, and you're probably going to want to ask questions. And I tend to kind of rant and digress. There's sort of like the good David Filipov speaker on one shoulder and the evil one on the other one. And the evil one is saying, tell him about the rock band you were in where you played a nuclear power plant. And the other one's like, you were going to start with Hegel. And what's actually probably going to happen here right now is somewhere in between. But I do need a volunteer, preferably an A student. Do I have an A student who can, somebody who's good at notes, good note taking? Oh, excellent. Sir, I need you to take notes. We're going to write down the themes that I promised to touch on so that when I wander off topic and forget where I'm talking about, I'm going to look to you and you're going to remind me, okay? Here they are. Bias. Freedom, brainwashing, lying and cheating, Mueller, trolling, and Putin. Huh? Quite a lineup. You're wondering, how is he possibly going to digress from that? And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take you back to September 11th, 2001. I am sitting at a desk in Moscow, just having returned from a report on the year anniversary of the sinking of a large Russian attack submarine. It was Putin's first major test of the Russian, not Soviet, Navy. It was the first major naval exercises since the fall of the Soviet Union. The exercises started calamitously. One of the major components of it was the launch of a cruise missile from this attack submarine. It blew up, and everybody on board died. However, that was not the story. The story was there was a rescue effort, and there were reports that crew members were knocking and sending messages to the surface, and they were alive, and we should save them. And for 3 weeks, we, the media, were writing these stories about this effort to save these submariners. And as time went by, some of you probably remember this. I can see that there are some people from my generation. Power! We're the new 50. You know, as an American, it's about to happen. As an American in Russia, a lot of times people see me, a guy with a sort of Slavic-looking last name, an American, speaks Russian with an accent, and they just say, oh, there's a CIA officer. And even today, even during the good old days of the 90s when we had sort of a good relationship, you'd be doing an interview with somebody with some, pro-Western foundation, and they'd say, oh, fine young CIA officer. And I'd go, ma'am, I'm not young, and I'm not CIA, but I'll take the fine. Back to our story. For 3 weeks, we wrote page one stories about the recovery and the rescue of this submarine. Only at the end of this story do we discover that, in fact, everybody was killed immediately when the cruise missile exploded. And all of that was just a line that we were being fed. It was really never explained. Why is it that you kind of led everybody on? And probably the reason was that Russia itself was embarrassed at the accident itself, as well as its slow response, and as well as the effect on the country, because this was the first major naval exercise in 10 years, and on the loved ones of the crew. So I was writing the 1-year anniversary of this on September 11th of 2001, sitting down, doing what I normally do, procrastinating. Turn on the TV, one of the Twin Towers is in flames. Look at my email. There's an email from my mom. Your dad was on that plane. Put my computer aside. Don't think I'm going to file today. And the world changed, and the biggest story in our lifetime was not the end of the Cold War and the end of history and the end of the adversarial relationship and the end of the Cold War. The story of our lifetime is what we've got right now, which is this ongoing war on terrorism, and I was now in the middle of it. Thanks to Dr. Gorham, we now know that I covered all these things and did all these wars and stuff, and as the Boston Globe's Moscow correspondent, I was closest to Afghanistan. Furthermore, the way into Afghanistan was through the Russian-speaking former Soviet Republic of Tajikistan. So who but me, not only that, I had an accreditation Always have an accreditation to Tajikistan. It'll always come in handy. Trust me. Trust me. You think it's obscure, but actually it's a great place to be accredited. They have McDonald's there now. You get to the border. They put you on a ferry. It's Russians. Russian border guards guard that border. It's a leftover thing from the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan. You speak in Russian to them. You know, I speak Russian. Get to the Afghan border post. They stamp my passport, you know. Oh, you got stamps. Cool. They speak Russian. Put me in a Jeep. Starting to get dark. You look around. There's nothing but just mud brick huts and desert and just empty. It gets dark in the desert really quickly, gloomy. And I realized there's a guy in the car. There's two guys in the car. They got the pancake hacks and the AK-74s, and they don't speak a word of Russian, English, Italian, French, German, anything that I can remotely pretend to understand. And I don't speak Dari. I have jumped into Afghanistan, going to a war, to a country where I don't know anything. And the now obscure student who asked a question that was about how do you handle, writing, how do you report in a place where you don't understand anything about the culture? That was me. And this is what happened next. We're driving, it gets dark. Suddenly the Jeep skids to a stop. One of the guys gets out and starts shooting. I'm like, yeah, baby, bring it on. This is it. This is the war right here. That's the Taliban. I get out my notes. They start writing. Shooting stops. The guy comes over. He's got a dead fox in his hand. And he's sort of smiling, waving the fox. And I'm like, what? What? First thought, why do you need so many bullets to shoot a fox? Second thought, what is this? Is this some sort of Afghan welcome signal? Is this sort of an, am I supposed to go shoot a fox? Should I eat the fox? Should I wear the fox? And I just make this gesture, I don't want your fox. And we drive off. I get to a place, and there's English-speaking people, and I tell them this story, and I'm like, I don't know what it was. And he says, well, maybe they just thought it would be cool to shoot a fox and thought you'd think it was cool that it was cool. I was like, yeah, well, there's also that interpretation. I was so queued up for it to be so different and so foreign and so just Afghan that, the obvious explanation eluded me, which is just guys with guns shooting at stuff because it was cool. Poor fox. Yeah, they're rabid there. It's probably a mercy killing. Russia and bias. 48% of you out there today express great trust in the media to tell the truth, which means 52% of you do not. And I understand that. I accept it. That means 52% of you at one point or other think that if I'm going out to tell a story, then the story I'm going to tell is basically me pursuing some agenda, or somebody told me to write it, or I've got some sort of ideological ideas about what I want to do, or whatever. I'm playing some game, and it ain't just report the facts, sir. Right? That's up. Thank you, President Trump. That's up from 39% in November 2016. So we got that going for us. But it's still half and half. And in Russia, I'm here to tell you that since everybody thinks I'm a young CIA officer, the belief that I'm telling the truth about what's going on in Russia is even lower than that. But we're not gonna fall to stereotypes here. I need another A student. Actually, no, all of you can do this. I'm going to do a quick poll. Okay, quick poll. All right, who feels freer, the average Russian or the average American? Russian, who's freer? Russians, raise hands. Who's freer? Americans, show of hands. A lot of abstentions out there, Florida. Expected more. You're a purple state. You guys decide the fate of the union, much more than my state, Massachusetts. All right, who's more brainwashed by what they see on TV and what their leaders say? Your average Russian or your average American? Yes. See, now, that's what I like about this country. You got a lot of iconoclasts out there. All right. Who is more likely to lie and cheat? Your average American or your average Russian? Let's see it. Average American more likely to lie and cheat. Raise your hand. Average Russian more likely to lie and cheat. They got that doping scandal. Come on. All right. So even. I like this crowd. Good crowd. All right. Give it up for being balanced. I expected you way more. Russians know. Russians, when you talk to Russians in Russian, when they're relaxing, hanging out, they know we are a country of people who allow ourselves to be less free than we could be because we spend so much time obeying the laws that other people impose on us. Why do you do that to yourself? Every time I say, no, I don't want to take the movie from Tor. I want to pay for it so I don't commit a felony. They're like, David, nobody cares, man. And I'm like, yeah, nobody cares until you're doing 25 years in jail in the United States. No one's going to know. And it's just this constant thing about every issue. Why do you Americans constantly limit yourselves? You have all the freedom in the world, and then you impose your own laws and follow them, and your own sort of political correct ideas of what's allowed to say. We Russians are way freer than you. And it's not what you would think when you look at the Russian political system versus ours, or when you look at the sort of authoritarian sort of system of government, or you look at sort of the Unitarian ideas that are on Russian state television. But that's because those things are vehicles where information is passed along, but it's not what's inside somebody's head. What's inside somebody's head in Russia, they know the law is going to be somebody thought this thing up to use against people, so just go around it. It's not there for us. They don't expect their leaders to be honest public servants. They expect them to be corrupt. Corruption is, as one brilliant writer wrote, Vladislav Inozemtsev, I'm stealing from him, 2007, The American Interest, just so that the people don't think I stole it, I just cited him. I can give the actual reference later. Yeah, his line was that corruption is the grease that makes the Russian economy exist. And Russians are allowed, they're free to have money, to travel, to have credit cards, to go to Bali instead of the United States, or to go to the United States, not like it, or decide our leaders are just as corrupt as theirs. Might as well stay where theirs are if they speak the language. They're allowed to make these decisions, and they make them every day when all of Russia doesn't emigrate to the United States. And I was thinking about this. I was in the office of the Deputy Speaker of the Russian Parliament, and I was complaining about, like usual, I complain. I was complaining about I want to watch Helen Wheels in Netflix, and I can't get it because it's not showing in the Netflix that's available in Russian. He's like, just use your VPN. And I'm like, come again, pal? You guys outlawed VPNs your last session. He's like, oh, that law. I use my VPN all the time. I'm like, what? You're telling me, a journalist? Oh, yeah, right. Why do you have that law? Well, we don't really enforce it. But then why do you have it? Well, they have it, see, because when they need to block a website, they can say, okay, we need to block this website. When they need to use it, they'll use it. There are now 4,300 and something blocked websites in Russia. When you do your, what he said he was going to talk about, but he didn't really talk about website, if I were the Russian government, I didn't like that, I'd just go and block it. And then you do yours, and maybe I'd block that too. That's what this thing is there for. It's not so that people stop using their VPNs. It's so that down the road, if somebody needs to do something, they can do it with this law. This is the lecture that I got from the Deputy Speaker of the State Duma. And then he said, and if you don't download Hell on Wheels for free, I swear to God, I'm going to use this law on you. Russia is not a country where people think that they're not free because somebody is telling them what to think. I've never heard a Russian say, you know, I'm not free because somebody's telling me that. In the Soviet Union, there was this idea of a state ideology. I'm old enough to remember that. There was a state ideology. We were being told to tell this, but we can't think that. There's an internet. Everybody's on it. And the most amazing thing happened. If you don't believe me, this is the greatest story. This is my favorite story. You can get up and walk. If you're bored right now, walk out after I tell you, but let me tell you this story first. There was this 2000 video. It was a parody video. It was called Satisfaction by this Italian guy whose name I don't know. But it's this techno music, and it's basically these kind of models kind of dancing suggestively, scantily clad, and sort of pointing at everyday objects, like, and there's a caption, broom, you know, bedstand, whatever. And it's sort of this idea of this sort of send-up of steamy videos. And somebody decides in the Civil Aviation Academy, these cadets decide to do a version of that, sort of for their own jokes. So these 17-year-old young men get, like, you know, bondage gear, belts, and, you know, underwear and hats, and do this sort of takeoff on this video. Same music, and they're walking around their dormitory, you know, urinal, you know, doorknob. And it looks like this kind of, you know, funny homoerotic parody video. But state television gets a hold of it. And you see Russian official ideology is there's an Orthodox church. You know, homosexuality and all that, that's their thing. That's their Western idea. We don't believe in that here. Yeah, sure, we don't oppress gay people, but we don't want that ideology here. What's wrong? Why are these students allowed to do that? We should have a case. There should be an investigation. And so this becomes a thing. Like the kids are going to be in hot water because this video got out. And then an amazing thing happens. Some doctors do their own version in support of these kids. It's in the operating room, you know. Scalpel, X-ray, and then some swimmers do it underwater. My favorite one is a group of retired women do it in a communal apartment, and they're just kind of like, you know, these kind of like refrigerator, and it's all the same music, and it's all in support of these guys, and you have dozens of these videos coming out every day on the internet, and the charges get dropped, and the kids are fine. Nobody does anything. The bureaucracy realizes it's just no point in going up against everybody in the country who basically don't see it as a big deal. That is freedom, but it's limited, and we know how limited it is. There's a gentleman, has anybody heard the name Alexei Navalny? All right. He's a guy who does these amazing open source investigations into corruption, essentially using available information to explain why bureaucrats in Putin's administration and government who should have a salary no greater than $100,000 are able to amass real estate empires, vineyards in Italy, you know, massive houses. Did we just lose the sound? No? Okay. I thought that maybe the government got a hold of this. He does this. He's got a big online following, and from time to time, last year, a few times, he was able to hold demonstrations across the country. They came out to protest corruption. And we, the media, made a big deal out of it. It was a big deal because here's a Russian guy who can get people out in the streets, even though these rallies haven't been allowed by the state. People are defying Putin and everything like that. And they get, you know, there'd be 20,000 people in Moscow and, you know, across the country, maybe 1,000 here, 1,000 there, widespread, more than, you know, in the last 5 years, but not a dent. Navalny's popularity in presidential polls is somewhere in like the low single digits. Ask Russians, he's not popular. They don't equate. I mean, people come out to protest corruption because, as we've stated, Russians don't believe in general in their leaders. But that doesn't mean they're going to go vote for Navalny. And they couldn't do it either if they wanted to, because he's been banned from this current presidential election campaign. There's a criminal conviction in a corruption case that he says was basically, what's the word I'm looking for? Trumped up. Sorry. That was not bias. It's just a word. Jeez. And the European Court of Human Rights agrees. Nonetheless, he's banned from running in the presidential election. And I was talking to somebody from the Kremlin, and I was like, listen, the guy isn't going to get 2%. Putin's going to get 60%. This is your chance to show that that's 2% Alexei Navalny. Nobody has to listen to him ever again once he gets it. Why don't you let him run? And the guy's like, look, here's the problem. Navalny doesn't stand for anything. All he does is criticize other people. His only skill as a politician, he's good in front of a camera. He's got no experience running anything. All he does well is criticize other people. We can't let somebody like that run for government. And I'm like, yeah, I know. That would never happen. And so my Kremlin friend says, the problem with you Americans is you're all brainwashed. You all think your democracy is the only one that works, that it's the only formula that works. You're all just mindless automatons repeating this mantra. Let everybody run, have elections, regime change. We don't believe in that here. I walked away from that, and I was thinking, Russians think we're out of our minds. They do. They think we're brainwashed. They see this Russia investigation stuff, and it's every day. I mean, I was walking in here, man, and there was a graphic on one of the TV stations. Return of the Russian bots. Can I get some reverb on that? The return of the Russian. And it's true. From their point of view, they're seeing this nonstop coverage of this investigation that alleges that Russia interfered with our election and with its hackers and trolls was able to single-handedly overturn the longest continual system of democratic exchange of power on Earth right now. With some trolls. And I mean, for a while, Russians were like, wow, that's really cool that you guys think we're that good at what we do. And I'm not talking about officialdom that would naturally deny doing anything. I mean, look, do the Russians do campaigns of influence? Do they do active measures? Sure. I'm talking about Russians who want to oppose Putin, like that same Navalny. Hey, listen, stop with that. Because you're making this superhuman kind of incredible mastermind, mega mind, evil guy who can do whatever he wants just by ordering some hackers. Stop it already. The election was November 2016. I'm paraphrasing things Russians have told me about that election. And the more pro-Western, wish Russia were like America somebody is, the more you're likely to hear that opinion. I'll say that again. You hear that opinion from people who were going to come to the United States, had their hotels booked and paid for, their tickets in hand, non-refundable. Their visas were at the embassy. Then, as a counter-sanction, Russia forced the embassy to fire half its staff. Those visas got put off, and therefore they lost all their money and their tickets. They're not going to the United States next year. They're going to Sochi, Russia for vacation, and they hate us. Americans, what's the problem with you is you guys got a hold of this idea that we're behind everything, and we think you're crazy. And if you think about it from that point of view, next time you're watching one of these things where they have the graphic where they're using the backwards R thing, and you got the big Putin with the bear and the KGB logo and the hammer and sickle. So what is this? What is this imagery? What is this super villain kind of? I mean, the KGB, the hammer and sickle hasn't been the Russian, symbol for 27 years. Why is that thing still out there? Why are we still using these kind of ethnocentric, racial kind of signifiers to designate our enemy? It's something we don't do with a lot of other cultures if you think about political caricature. But let's move on. The problem is that right now you have Russians who know that the United States is their adversary. And a lot of these people are people who are younger than 30 years old, who don't remember the Soviet Union, didn't need to have the Soviet Union. Basically, they've come of age in a period where, slowly but surely, the United States and you just did it. The United States and Russia have slowly descended into this adversarial relationship and this notion that there's a right and a wrong, and we're right and they're wrong. I actually have Russians come up to me, educated Russian people, saying, David, if I go to the United States right now, is everybody going to think I'm a spy? I'm like, no, why would you think that? Well, just watching your TV, it looks like everybody's a spy. And again, I'm not saying that I don't agree with anything that's been reported. I'm just saying how it looks when you look at it from the other side. When we think about the other, we're talking about people who are just like this audience right here, sitting there, when is he going to get to the question and answer session? And they'd be doing that in Russia too, that they'd be doing it with Russian accents. And when you see some of these reports that talk about Russian meddling, it gets this sense that there's this kind of like this country of mutant zombies that have no say in Putin's evil mastermind plan to undermine everything for some reason that we still haven't figured out. I was going to talk a lot about history and stuff, and I get the feeling that we're still good with time. No, I got plenty of time. You bored yet? Bored? Back row? Up there. We bored? Good. All right. So one of the things you hear now when we have this new adversarial relationship is you get Russians saying, the end of the Soviet Union is the problem. When we lost the Soviet Union, we lost all the authority, we lost the ability to look at the Americans as equals. We gave away the thing that made them frighten us. Putin has brought some of that back, but we still don't have all of it back. So I take you back to December 1991, when I was in Parliament and they voted the Soviet Union out of existence. Did I already tell you this part? The vote was like 175 to maybe 15. A lot of those 175 later on, public figures all would say, well, I was always against this, and you could kind of go back. I used to have it, the roll sheet. I lost it somewhere. It's like, well, no. You voted the Soviet Union out of existence with your own hands. Not only that, you were representative of a country that wanted the Soviet Union to end. They wanted it to end because they wanted Russia to become part of the modern world with all the good things about a market economy and freedom and friendship with the West and openness, ability to travel, all that stuff, credit cards. 2 years later, that same parliament tried to impeach the president who was the leader of all this stuff, Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin was the overlord of this effort, supported by the West, supported by Western loans, supported by U.S. political and economic might, to oversee the transformation from a communist planned economy to a free market economy. It sounded really good. And we all wrote about it like it was a really good, and it was a good idea to have Russians who lived like they did in the Soviet Union be able to wear designer T-shirts like the one you're wearing now. And by the way, they do now wear them. but they had to go through what they went through. It sounded like a great idea. In 1993, it wasn't working. They tried to impeach the president. What did he do? He sent tanks to that same parliament building and blew it away. I was there that day, too. You're like, wow, he's like Zelig. He's in first he talks like Woody Allen, and then he's a Woody Allen character, although now I don't really like Woody Allen anymore either. So let's just leave him out of this. I was there, and the most amazing thing about that day was the tanks were on this side of the Moscow River. The Russian parliament building was on this side. People were standing on the bridge watching it. And the bullets were flying, and people were getting picked off. I mean, I remember trying to walk through it, and there's this guy lying there bleeding. I'm like, why are we all standing here? And they're like, this is our history unfolding. It's like, yeah, I guess they got a point there. It's unfolding. I think I'd like it to unfold with me sort of protected. But essentially, that victory by Yeltsin was cheered universally in Western and U.S. media as a victory for democracy over revanchist elements of the communists and nationalists. That's what it was. You'd go back and look at the clips. And maybe it was. But after that, Yeltsin, the president, no longer had to listen so much to elements of civil society like parliament. And everybody remembers that. Fast forward a little bit. 1996, that same Yeltsin, now enfeebled, probably drunk a lot of the time, definitely has heart trouble, very rarely appears in public. And when he does, he's not nearly the strapping guy he was a few years ago. He's running against the communist who now is polling pretty well. Yeah, that's right. The communists never really went away, did they? And he's going to lose. And at one point, his advisors say, we've got to cancel this election because we can't afford to lose it. And so the liberal establishment, the pro-Western, pro-democracy people, the newspapers, the media companies, everybody rallies behind the cause to save Yeltsin. And he wins. But the best part for our talk today is the Time magazine cover that comes out that summer. Yanks to the rescue, how some American political consultants joined the Yeltsin campaign clandestinely and helped him win and save Russia. Now I ask you. I mean, look. Maybe that was great, and maybe it was good. But the problem is, every time you say election interference right now, Russians say, you lying, cheating, brainwashed, unfree Americans, don't you realize that what you've been doing all this time was influencing? And it was Vladimir Putin, endowed with all the power that this super president, who didn't have to listen to parliaments anymore, which we cheered, got from Yeltsin, whom we cheered when he got reelected and apparently helped. He realized Russia is at a disadvantage that this information war can take place, and we can't do anything about it because the Americans are so much better at it. They have all these institutions that work with our institutions. Let's shut them down. They've got all this media that works with our media. Let's stop that. In fact, let's make media into a weapon. In fact, let's make information a weapon that we can use to fight the war that we need to fight against this force that has infiltrated us. And that's what's happened for the last 17 years. Information is a weapon, which used to be the way they talk about it. And here's the thing. These Mueller indictments, the Paul Manafort, Rick Gates indictment, now Rick Gates guilty plea, they in a very detailed way, the way a prosecutor, we got any prosecutors in the building? We got any prosecutors or legal? Right? Brick by brick, build a case that you can argue in a court. Make it go logically. Don't reach, don't make wild. This is a case being built. And the case was made to show that Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign chairman, had dealings, probably illicit ones, with the head of another, with the country's other government, the government of Ukraine under Viktor Yanukovych, who lost power and fled to Russia, where Putin is the president. While he was president of Ukraine, Yanukovych was pro-Yanukovych, pro-money, pro the other guys that he liked. But now when people talk about him, they talk about Ukraine's former pro-Putin president, Yanukovych. That's right. He fled to Russia and retroactively became this pro-Putin character. If you study the history of Ukraine under Yanukovych, it's a lot of things, some of them good, a lot of them bad. But he was not more pro-Putin than pro-something else. Yet, retroactively, since he's pro-Putin, now the fact that Manafort colluded with him means Manafort was colluding with Putin's proxy, Yanukovych. You see what I'm doing here? I mean, maybe there was a collusion between the two, but what I just did was I just took two things that were real. Yanukovych really did flee, and there was a lot of corruption, and we have a prosecutor who's made it very plausible that there was a connection because we have an indictment, we have a guilty plea. But then by sewing them together into this fact that those guys were obviously involved with Putin, that is where fake news gets born, when you take two facts and put them together and say this is true. I'm not saying any of that is fake. I'm just saying that that's the process. That's how it looks. Let's interrupt to talk about a fake news situation I was involved in. It's kind of funny, so this is going to be comic relief. I like to take a lot of pictures, and I like to write about people, not just politics. After 3 months of just doing this investigation stuff, I decided to do a story where neither the words Putin, nor Trump, nor Kremlin were going to be present. And I found it by making a really stupid mistake. I was writing a story about a bar in Yekaterinburg, which is Russia's fourth largest city in the Urals. They had made this kind of quasi-nationalist joke. They've taken all their cocktails and drinks and renamed them with Russian names. So a Jack Daniels was now a Zhora Danilov, and a Margarita was a Marina Rosh, and so on and so forth. So I called them up, I did a little interview, did a little story, and I referred to Yekaterinburg as the West Siberian city of Yekaterinburg, which is kind of like calling Albany a suburb of Boston. I got a lot of flame on Twitter, on Facebook, and got in touch with these journalists in Yekaterinburg who said, why don't you come out here and we'll show you the difference between Siberia and the Urals. So that sounded like fun. So I went out, and it turns out that nobody actually knows where the border is. There are provincial borders, but they don't actually match the place where the Ural mountain shelf underground ends and the Siberian plain begins. So we went around looking for that border, which had been marked in the 19th century by these signposts that we basically found in the woods, and it was really cool. And I asked people on each side, so you're in the Urals and you're in Siberia, how do you feel different? It was funny. They did this really great video that you'll have to believe me on because that company went out of business and that video got taken down. But it was really cool, like that big fish you caught, trust me. The 48% of you who do trust me on that one. Time passes. I took one really cool picture there. It was just a snapshot. I was at the top of the tallest building in Yekaterinburg. There was a beautiful sunset. It was cold. It was like 20 below Fahrenheit. And the clouds, you don't get that around here, but let me explain what happens. There's snow, and then the smokestacks have this thick kind of puffy smoke that comes out. And the sunset was this bright yellow sunset coming across this long landscape and the orange sky behind it. And I was like, whoa, man, click, put it on, Facebook and Instagram. And that's the picture that they used for the story. Almost a year passes. A harmless radioactive cloud goes over Europe. French atomic scientists call their Russian counterparts. It's like, hey, can you explain this harmless radioactive cloud? And the Russians, we don't know anything about it. And they're like, well, it's ruthenium-106. That's your isotope. You guys produced it. Can you just tell us where the leak was and why it happened? Nope, no leak, sorry. At one point, enough journalists asked this question that the Russian foreign ministry says, we'll organize a trip out there so you can see we have no leaks. But then that trip never happens. And the story basically dissipates like that cloud, harmlessly. Except I notice that my sunset is the picture used in all the wire stories talking about this thing. And when you look at my sunset in the context of a harmless radioactive cloud, now it's this bizarre landscape with this horrendous orange sky and these yellow XZ rays that are shining through it. It's like, look at this nuclear landscape disaster. That is, you take a fact, which is that sunset, and a fact, which is that harmless cloud. And when you combine them, you make the inference that that's what the radioactive sky looks like in the Urals. That's right. Innocently, unwittingly, a small event of fakedness was had. If, of course, somebody makes the same conclusions as I just made. Now, of course, being discerning people, you would actually read the caption and see this is just a picture. But you know what I'm saying? That power of association is so important. And it's so important when we, as consumers of news that's flashing across the screen at that 24/7 rate, comes across and says, well, it says this. The indictment involving the Internet Research Agency, the famous troll farm, which now is a troll factory, so that obviously trolls have undergone the Industrial Revolution. Pretty soon it'll be a troll hive. This is, again, a very detailed argument, a very plausible argument of a conspiracy funded by these shadowy companies that sent these people in various poses, pretending to be Americans, stealing IDs, getting on the internet, sowing discord, at some point possibly also trying to tip the election in favor of Donald Trump. And behind it all is Putin's favorite cook. Now, it is true. Yevgeny Prigozhin is a guy whose restaurants were so popular with Putin that George W. Bush actually dined at one in 2002 when he was on a state visit to Russia. And it's true that in Russia, if you've got a lot of money like Prigozhin does, and if you're getting concessions from Syrian oil interests like Prigozhin is, you probably have some connections to the Kremlin that go beyond the fact that you make an excellent roast duck. But that still does not mean Putin ordered this. It means that Putin is a relationship with this guy, and maybe down the road it's plausible that the two know each other, and it's plausible that there's a relationship, and that Mueller has detailed this operation. And he specifically did not accuse the Russian government, and he specifically did not say this is a Kremlin plot. He specifically limited it to what he can say for sure. And yet in coverage of it, and in discussion of it mostly, you see this is proof. In fact, the president also says this is proof that it's not me. Everybody's leaping to that conclusion. And again, in this place where we start combining facts that's real and facts that's plausible, we start to get into that world where we still aren't proving what we're supposed to be proving. And it's the journalist's job to get in there and say exactly what it is we know and exactly what it is we don't know. And every time we don't do that, what are we doing? We're making information into a weapon that can be used. Not only that, and this is the part that really kills me, every time we say Russian bots are at it again, what we're doing is we're basically saying that a bunch of Twitter profiles with no face, I mean, come on, man, 20,000 tweets, follows 300 people, has one follower, and his face is your cat. I mean, that's a bot, right? I mean, I know that, and I'm old. You know, just mute them. But like the idea that we're saying that these guys, that thing can basically destabilize our greatest institution, which is the peaceful transfer of power by democratic means, it's mind-blowing. It doesn't just give Putin like these superhuman powers, it also denigrates our own understanding of what information is. We basically are signing on to the Putin idea that information is a weapon, and we are at a war. We're basically giving up our idea of information to that guy, which is ridiculous. Even the Russians are laughing at it. The funny thing about that is that Putin is not all-powerful. Putin does not control everything. If Putin wanted to have a massive conspiracy, and my friends in the audience who are from Russia, I hope you will agree, if somebody in Russia says, I'm going to collect everybody I know who works for me, and I'm going to give them specific instructions, and I want them to go out and do exactly what I just told them to the letter, what's going to happen? Хотелось как лучше, получилось как всегда. Right? The Russians are giggling. Good, good, good. We wanted it to the best. It turned out like it always does. Because, what did I say about rules and laws in Russia? They're there so that you don't follow them. So it's just as plausible that Putin said, now look, I know that some of you guys really can't stand Americans. Yevgeny, I know that you put American flags on mannequins and then shoot them at 50 yards with guns. I know you do this. But when you do your trolling and hacking, which I'm fine if that's what you got to do, make sure Trump doesn't win. Like he could have said that. Or maybe he didn't, or maybe he didn't even know. You know he's not on the internet, right? Yeah, he's not on the internet. Okay. I'm not saying, I mean, maybe Putin did mastermind this. Maybe he's an evil genius. The point is that he's a guy who runs by consensus in a country where it's very difficult to make anyone do anything. Putin can express his power when he directs it at one place. Like somebody calls him up on his annual call-in show and says, I'm unjustly unable to get a good apartment. My children live in this rotten barracks, until he'll go out there and upbraid the local official, who undoubtedly is an interim replacement for the real guy who's in jail for corruption. And Putin will say, get them an apartment, and he'll give them an all-expenses-paid trip to Sochi, Russia, which really happened. That's a true news story. Like he can do that. But during this, on this 4-hour-long televised show where people call in and Putin helps them with their problems, there's also a live feed of texts that are coming in. And these texts are incredible, and they're showing up on state-controlled Russian television. Putin, everyone's tired of you. Step down. Or Putin, nobody believes in this circus. And he's there watching this on the screen and doing his Putin thing where he responds, in that measured voice that we've all heard, talking, giving these statistics. And I talked to somebody who's from Russian state television. He's like, how do you guys handle your state television? You censor people. He's like, no, we have true freedom of the press. You'd never be able to get away with this in America. And I'm trying to imagine ABC television running coverage of the Olympics and you guys texting in, this is baloney. Let the Russians play. Would they put that on the TV? I doubt it very much. Again, I'm not saying Russia has freedom of the press and we don't. But it's just their way of looking at what Putin is doing up on that screen. He's not the Wizard of Oz. He's the Wizard of Oz, the one that we know once we get to know him. See? All powerful, but only to the extent that those powers are vested in it, and only to the extent that we believe in them. Now, I got 23 more pages, and I could keep going, but I'm also at the 39-minute mark, so let's just stop me for crying out loud and ask your questions. I mean, how long can you put up with this? Right? Or keep going? Keep going? Really? All right, here's my favorite one, okay? We're talking about misconceptions, and we're talking about Putin, we're talking about power. And I mentioned the Orthodox Church, and one of the Kremlin's things has been, let's harness the power of the church as a unifying, polarizing aspect of Russian society. Russia now has 4 official religions. One of them is Russian Orthodoxy, which is also the majority religion. But by far is it the only one. What's the second most populous religion in Russia? Russia specialists who are not Russian. Islam. That's right. Which country has more Muslims, Russia or the United States? All right. Good. So every once in a while, the Orthodox Church will bring in the relics of a well-known Russian saint. And this past summer, the most revered Russian saint, Saint Nicholas, that guy, Santa Claus, one of his ribs shows up in a bulletproof ark and goes on viewing in the Church of Christ the Savior, which is the rebuilt version of the one that Stalin had blown to smithereens. There's a lot of blowing up in my talk. What is that? It's probably something I should talk to somebody about, all this blowing up stuff. Anyway, so millions, hundreds of thousands of Russians queue up, stand in lines that go like 4-hour-long lines, more than that, to view this rib for a few seconds. You stand in line, these priests and their helpers kind of like push you along. If you stay too long, they tell you to say your prayers before you go there. You can bend over, you can kiss it, move on. If you start to try to say your prayer there, they kind of give you a little polite, or not so polite if you don't move, shove. But this moment is really important to the people standing in line. I go in there, Western journalists, oh, well, because the call-in show didn't talk to you and you can't get what you need from, civil society because it doesn't exist, so you're praying to God for the things Putin can't provide, right? No, that's not what people were doing. You see, this is the answer that I got most often. Unfortunately, I can't show you the quotes because as soon as I identified myself as an American reporter, people shut up and said, you're probably working for the CIA. And I'm like, I'm standing in a line with you here. What's CIA? People would chat, but they didn't want to be on the record. But this is what they said. I'm not really religious, but this is a thing. It's important. St. Nicholas means a lot to this society. I'm in this society. I really don't know why, but I'm here. I feel like it's important. There were people teaching other people the prayer that you write so that you could put it in, you could put it next to an icon and make a wish. There were people explaining to people what you do. Like, not everybody knew. There were a lot of Orthodox novices, sort of the kind of person that shows up only at Christmas and Easter, right? And they were like, I'm here because I believe that this is part of my society and I want to be part of it. I'm like, what about Putin? Putin, this is Russia. I'm in Russia. I want to do a Russian thing. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it isn't what I expected. And it isn't what I saw when I read some other reports that were talking about this sort of notion, which is the notion we create, which is that these people are here to pray for a miracle that they can't get because their lives are so bad. Yeah, I did hear people like that. But they were the people who would have been praying for a miracle in this society. Somebody who would go to a church and pray for a miracle who believes that that's their last resort. Anywhere in the world, that's a certain person. And there's a certain person who goes to church because they think that that's what you do. You go to church. You're part of the society. You're part of this fabric. And these are people who want to be part of a fabric. It wasn't the sort of sexy, easy-to-do story. It was a story that was unexpected. But it was also a real story. And when you step back to think about it, it makes total sense. Why shouldn't it be that way? That happened again and again during my time there, during the times that I wasn't writing about the Russia investigation. This idea of Putin and his philosophy being something that people mindlessly accept, which luckily my crowd here wasn't like, you weren't on the brainwashed thing. That was good. Good job by you. But it's just not there. It isn't there any more than you think you're being brainwashed. But there is a constant effort to tell people what they're seeing. And this is something for us to pay very careful attention to, because as we're looking at those bots and deciding not to let them influence our next election vote, so Russians need to watch very carefully what they're being told, right? Russians want peace. Russians want safety. A suicide bomb went off in a St. Petersburg metro station. Immediately, the Russian police go out and look for the guilty party. And within a few days, there are these film-for-TV arrests of these two Uzbek brothers from Kyrgyzstan. Using my map here, which I didn't request. Kyrgyzstan, former Soviet republic, predominantly Muslim, on the border of China, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. They intersect in this area called the Fergana Valley, which is historically poor, historically Muslim, and currently there's always been a lot of ethnic tension. Currently it's a major recruiting spot for Islamic State. After the Caucasus, I'd say that for Russia and the former Soviet Union, it's the second largest place. And so from this town, these two brothers are in St. Petersburg. They get arrested, this for TV arrest. And you look at it, you go, well, that was an easy takedown. And in this thing, two FSB agents, this is shown on national TV, without vests and without weapons, run up to a guy, haul him down. You do have a grenade. The guy produces a grenade. They take the grenade away. And I'm like, wait. Hold on there, Sergey. If you know he's got a grenade, why aren't you armed? Why don't you have more? I mean, two guys, right? Like, he drops the grenade, you're both dead. What are you doing? And it doesn't add up. So Smart Boy decides to go do an investigation in Kyrgyzstan. You guys know what the Freedom House Freedom List is, right? You all know? Where's the United States on that list currently? Like, we must be one of the top freest nations in the world, right? Let's have a show of hands. Top 10, United States? Top 20? Top 30? How about 50? Yeah, that's right. Latvia, Costa Rica, Chile. These are all countries that are freer than you. What was it that those Russians said? Americans are not as free as they think they are. According to Freedom House, we're not, whatever those guys are up to. Anyway, in Freedom House, Russia's like 142, and Kyrgyzstan's 89. So I figured, I'm going to get a boost when I go. I'm going to feel that 89ness. No. Second I get off the plane, they identify that I'm a reporter. They say, don't go reporting. I go and report. I get arrested. This can come out now. It wasn't something I was talking about when I was in Russia. I didn't get arrested. I got detained. They fined me for being a reporter where I wasn't supposed to be one. All I did was take pictures, and somebody else did the interviews. But never mind. And I had to pay a fine. Get back on the plane to repressive fake news Russia, and immediately felt great in that 142 because, the sun is shining and nobody takes note of my existence. And, I go to a Starbucks and get myself a Frappuccino. My best story, and my last one for you, my favorite fake news story. One of the last things I did. Vladimir Putin telephones Donald Trump to thank the CIA for heading off a terrorist attack in St. Petersburg. Why, that's every single theme we've been talking about here, all in one big, beautiful news story. The search engine optimization is off the charts. And as a matter of fact, that thing got 1 million views. That's like how you get a raise at a place, by getting 1 million views. Vladimir Putin calls Donald Trump to thank the CIA for helping to prevent a terrorist attack in St. Petersburg. And so we write the story up. And then it's like, wait a minute. The CIA does not do victory laps. The CIA doesn't take credit. What is this idea of a foreign head of state calling up our president to thank the CIA? You could send them a card. Why do you got to do this in a public way? Why does the Kremlin have to make a public announcement about this? What are they really up to? And, you figure there's got to be some sort of, propaganda type sort of thing going on. And then you look into the actual crime. And here are the facts. A guy rented a garage to some guys. The owner of the garage is going by. He smells a weird chemical. He opens the door, looks inside, finds these chemicals. It's bomb-making stuff. So he calls the FSB. They come. He tells them about it. They go arrest the guys. The guys are arrested. The terrorist attack doesn't happen. Where's the CIA in that? Like, where did they help this? What was there? Like, if that's the crime, then what is this CIA help? What are we being sold here? You know what I mean? When you start looking at it beyond that headline that got the 1 million views, what is this story really all about? Is it something that they just made up so that, as the president later tweeted, this is what happens when our governments can cooperate? No, what happens when our governments cooperate is what's still happening. The United States and Russia are still saving the polar bears together. We're still flying to the International Space Station on their rockets at $80,000 per seat, and they're enjoying the financing so that they can have participation in the International Space Station. There's all these other things that, despite it all, we're still doing together. That's what happens when Russia and the United States get along. Crazy fake stories about CIA plots that get thanked on public, social media. That's weird. And on that weirdness, I really am going to stop because I'm at the end of my pages. And I'm tired of my voice. Ask a question, please. Somebody. Come on. You. Thank goodness. I'm getting tweets from my mom. David, stop being so silly.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Time magazine article, but I think you played it a little bit soft because there was very many reasons for people to hate Yeltsin in 1996 because he was responsible for shock therapy. That really devastated the Russian people. I took some notes here. Poverty, for 2 million people in poverty in 1989, 74 million in 1995, the year before. A suicide rate went up. Violent crime rate went up.
Life expectancy went way down.
Yeah, it was a terrible time.
Yeah.
And this was all under the aegis or the advice of a bunch of Harvard University hustlers. A Russian friend of mine called them free market Bolsheviks, basically. And so there was all kinds of reasons for people not to want to reelect Yeltsin, and yet America went in there and completely pushed him back into power because they were so glad that he did so much.
He got a lot of help from the Russians. I think they're probably more influential. Sorry.
But it was a terrible time.
What is the question? Is there a question?
Yeah, well, yes, it is. Don't you think that was that the re-election of Yeltsin was a terrible thing for the Russians?
Yeah, that's why I put it in my speech and actually made a pause there when I said, does that sound like election intervention for you? But because everything is so silly when I say it, it didn't sound. But yes, I share your umbrage.
Please come to the microphone. And let's let a student come up. Go ahead.
Well, you're a student of life, sir. We never stop learning. I'm learning myself.
It seems to me that Russia and the United States in particular have vested interest, being that they both have the most nuclear weapons in the world and could destroy the world to cooperate, and also both of them have a very, very strong emphasis to fight the same type of terrorism. But it seems like to me that there's a type of neocons in our country that just want to make weapons and weapons and weapons and surround Russia with weapons. And from what I understood, when the wall came down, Gorbachev was given a sort of a promise, hey, we're not going to surround you with weapons and everything. And I just think this is insane in what they've been doing and caught doing. And I'd like your take on that.
One of the sources of Russian insecurity is the fact that the NATO alliance did expand to include the former nations of the socialist bloc and former Soviet republics. By the way, the Baltics do not want you to call them former Soviet republics, so we won't do that. That said, the paranoia and escalation it definitely is on both sides. You get these incredible scenarios on the Russian side about the need to build up. I mean, it like all of these things, arm races are always built on mutual expectations of the worst. So the Russian signal is NATO is expanding. The Americans say, no, this is a benevolent organization. We want you to be part of it too. The Russian says it doesn't look pretty benevolent to us. And then we get this situation that you described. And right now, there are Russians who know. They know that NATO's next move is to start getting inside Belarus. This huge defensive, this huge military exercise last summer, Zapad 2017, West, this annual exercise of the Russian military. They do it by military district, and this summer was West. The entire scenario was Poland and Lithuania, well, countries that were fictional that looked like Poland and Lithuania, with backing from Western powers, well, they're called foreign powers, tried to cut out a section of what looks like Belarus, which is part of Russia's sphere of influence, to change the regime. And this massive response using nuclear weapons and all kinds of land and navy forces is what this exercise is. And everybody in the West is saying, oh my God, the Russians, they're planning to invade the Baltics with this exercise. And the Russians are saying, no, 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 this is us defending against you, NATO. And people in there are like, we're not invading you. Nobody out there is thinking, oh, let's invade, Belarus next. But there are people in Russia who, like you just described, know that they're coming. And we better be ready because you never know what that West is going to pull. And you're right. The pact between the United States and Russia that we don't use nuclear weapons and we wouldn't even consider it is still one of the major sources of cooperation between our two countries, right? It's keeping the Earth alive. But don't think that those drills don't take place on both sides. And, we saw them. They were testing their ICBMs in this thing. Oh, I could go on all day about this. Let's listen to the students.
Okay, we have a lot of students lined up, and so let's not...
Shorter.
That'll
Okay.
Yes, and we won't have you at the end. Will be our last question. Okay.
So first of all, I just wanted to know, because as a journalism student and someone who is interested in being a reporter in Russia, what do you think is a way that Americans can be better consumers of American news?
Americans of American news.
Yes.
Oh, first of all, if it's got no face and it's got 20,000 tweets and no followers, and it insults you, just mute it, because it's probably a bot just trying to get in your head. The speed that things are coming at us, especially when you're a journalist and you need to respond, like me with that CIA thanks Putin for something story. The speed that things are coming at you, it really saps you of the ability to slow down and look at the facts that you're looking at, really consider them, and try to write what you can actually say. Try to write the facts that you know and not jump to the conclusions that would, if you put them together. Does anyone remember that old Lifesavers ad, right? Put the two and kind of, anyway, that's what you have to be able to stop to do. We have to learn how to do that quickly, to identify, hey, this is a real fact, that's a real fact, but these two things put together are not necessarily true. They're plausible, but they aren't facts. You've got to learn to do that at full speed. And by the way, if you're also planning to work overseas, learn the language of the place, because you need to be able to do it in their language at full speed as well.
Thank you.
Hey, I know you.
Hey. My question's actually really similar to hers, but it's kind of in reverse. So how should American readers interpret Russian news and find veracity in that?
There are a lot of excellent Russian news outlets. Ultimately, every news consumer has to take that 48% of theirs and say to themselves, I'm reading this, it makes sense to me, I like it, I'll continue to read this particular person or outlet and judge each story on its merits. And when you do that, you can assemble the sources, like I have my favorite ones, that you trust that you're going to read. And the same thing with Russian media. Although it's a difficult landscape for Russian media, although there's a lot of pressure, there are outlets that constantly do investigations. Novaya Gazeta is one of them. There's an organization called Meduza, which is based in Latvia, but it is constantly doing really excellent looks. Now, of course, official Russian people will tell you Meduza is an anti-Russian, Russophobic is the word now, a Russophobic organization. But you basically have to take the best of everything. I've seen very good reports on Russian state television or on Russian state radio. You have to listen to a lot of things and judge, what am I seeing here? Compare it to other stuff. You have to spend time and effort. Just like a journalist, if you want to get stories right, you can't just go with the first thing that you see. You have to spend time and effort trying to figure out what is the plausible thing here and what can I say for sure and what can't I say. And so maybe your stories are going to look less interesting because they're going to be full of more qualifications. Well, he said that, and he said that, but at least they'll be true. I'm not trying to teach you to be lame, but I am trying to suggest that we have to compare and stop and think about everything that we're saying before we go out and, fire it up.
Okay, thank you. These last two guys have brushed upon the idea of what we should do as individuals. But so how do you think that we should try and challenge this fake news and these misinterpretations of Russia that are portrayed in the media as they're sort of spreading through our entire American society as a whole?
Not portrayed in the media. Congress has people, I was, when I got back, I was ambushed by all my friends who were telling me all this stuff. The society is doing it now. Everybody's talking about it, What do we do? What do we do to stop stereotypes? Again, it's the same technique. What do you really know and what is just being told to you? What do you really? We know that our prosecutor, who's been doing a very good job so far of making cases, he's just made this particular case, and it's plausible that it's linked to that particular thing, but he did not do that yet. You have to have a rigor to your analysis. And it goes for Russia, it goes for everything else. You know, Russia's not the only country to have misconceptions about it, and it definitely does its own share of misconceiving, doesn't it? But you can use that same rigor every time you talk about everything. Now, when people analyze this talk, or this random sort of collection of conversation, and go through and find things that I said that were all of the things I'm criticizing, you know, I'm talking full speed, live, and I might be making those very same mistakes. The very nature of from the hit conversation is what lends yourself to these kind of spot generalizations that may not necessarily be true. That's the thing you've got to be very careful about.
Okay, thank you. Hi.
Hi.
So you mentioned that Vladimir Putin isn't as all-powerful as people make him out to be.
Yeah.
There's a Forbes article that listed him as the most powerful person in the world, and I was wondering, do you agree with that? Why not?
Depends on how you define power, see? Forbes also has a list of the wealthiest people in the world, and he's not number one on that. He's definitely got more nukes than any leader in the world, but there's a leader in China who you could argue has greater economic power. His position is more secure. I mean, what are we judging power on? I believe that that Forbes decision, you know, you could make an argument that in Europe, the most powerful person for the longest time wasn't him, it was Angela Merkel. Because she could make a lot more stuff happen, and she could make a lot of things go a lot of ways, including who decides to import what and export what. Never mind. The question about this power, it's a decision that's being made based on a few factors that aren't necessarily the whole picture. I could tell you that Russians do not think of their country as more powerful than China. And they wonder why we don't consider China a bigger adversary. That said, as far as what he's been portrayed to be able to do, I would say that Putin has projected personal power as well as anyone, and we've all helped him out with that. When they make the movie, and I'm trying to imagine who plays Putin. When they make the movie, he's going to be a superhero. You know? They won't even have to make up the stuff about him riding the horse or, you know, wrestling the tiger or whatever, because that takes place. He projects that. He projects that so well. He's so good at it. I've been at press conferences where, without notes, he just answers questions. He's so collected. He knows exactly what he wants to do. But at the same time, he's the president of a country that, economists speak up, is their economic power greater than that of Italy? You know what I'm saying? It's the 13th largest economy in the world. So, yeah, they got those nukes. Yeah, they could destroy Earth many times more than anybody else other than us could. But there's so many things they can't do. And they couldn't, if that's what they were trying to do, swing the election in France. Turns out in France, where everybody had to vote, unlike this country where 50% of the population is allowed not to show up, 25% voted for one, 25% voted for the other. In this country, that's the end of the election. In France, where everyone does vote, 25% voted for that candidate that the Kremlin was putting its bet on, and everybody else voted for the other guy. That's the end of that. He's not all powerful. But for Forbes, that worked for them, and I'm sure they have a nice headline. Did it have like a bear and a... No?
Nothing like that.
Thank God.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I appreciate the humor and entertainment value of
There's a but coming.
Of what you said. There certainly is. I appreciate the former student's question about Putin being all-powerful and how we judge someone's power. And, you know, I think you're right that there's a lot of misconceptions about how Americans view Russia. However, I think there are some people and their families who would agree that Putin has a measure of power that leaders in other countries don't, and that's the families of Anna Politkovskaya, Paul Klebnikov, Vladimir Kara-Murza, and possibly Viktor Yushchenko, among others. These are journalists, the first two, who have actually been killed, most likely by Russian governmental authorities. So I'm a bit concerned by the humor with which the power of Vladimir Putin is sort of brushed off when there is a real cost and violence to some of the things that have happened under his leadership?
You know, humor is an interesting thing. When you're a journalist, you use it a lot of times to cope with stuff. You may or may not have been listening when I discussed the great deal of personal tragedy and tragedy I've witnessed, but I recommend that you go to davidfilipov.com. There's a button that says Listen to David Filipov's interviews in Russian, and find the interview that me and Anna Politkovskaya do together on a radio station on Echo Moskvy, because I knew her.
I did too.
And I knew Sergei Yushchenkov, and I knew Yuri Shikachikhin. And when I wrote the list of 10 opponents of Putin who ended up dead by suspicious circumstances, I believe that 4 or 5 of that people on that list are people I knew personally, and 2 of them were my friends. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to have a sense of humor. That's just the way that I do things. And I'm not trying to soft sell Putin's regime or things that it does. That said, Yuri Shikachikhin, who was my friend and who I knew from the middle 80s, he died in suspicious circumstances, and he died as a critic and a person who was probably going to give testimony to the FBI that was probably going to be damning to the regime of Vladimir Putin. But those things are all plausible. All I'm talking about here is you can't make the connection that Putin killed Yuri Shikachikhin because of that string of plausible facts. And with Politkovskaya, it's the same problem. We all have gone through the investigation of who and exactly how did she, and Istimirova, and all the other people who died in these circumstances. I'm talking only about saying exactly what we know and exactly what we don't know. And trust me when I tell you that my efforts to combine, the Fox and September 11th are not an effort to raise foxes above the tragedies that changed the world. It's merely the way that I tell the story of great personal and, international trauma.
Thank you.
Next week's speaker will be a very serious person. But I knew Politkovskaya. I saw her, and I was at places where people tried to put her down and tried to say she wasn't a patriot, and she had a great answer to that. I'm a patriot because I criticize my country. It's one of the greatest lines. I don't know if that was her own, but when she said it, it was very powerful. Yeah.
Hello. So speaking of patriotism right there, when you were talking earlier about them seeing the rib in the church,
yeah,
and you said that how when you're talking to them, they said, oh, this is a Russian thing, this isn't a Putin thing. That really got me thinking, because I feel like in America, we associate our country so much with the state that's in power. So like the president, we've never had a regime where the president has been in power. We've always had a democracy for the last 300 years. Whereas in Russia, I feel like it's interesting how first they had a monarchy / absolute monarchy, then they had the USSR, a republic for a brief period, and then a republic again. And I was wondering how that maybe changes their perception of their own country and their own liberties versus ours.
Right, and I mean, I think that I tried to touch on that when I was talking, again, in a humorous way, about notions of freedom and notions of sovereignty. In Russia, the understanding with the powers that be is that is probably a force that is corrupt and probably not there to help you out. They're there to serve their own interests, and it's up to you to figure out a way to get by. In this country, there are a lot of people who believe that the purpose of the government is to help us get by. And it's true for whoever wants it to be true for them. I'm not saying that it's not true in this country, and I'm not saying that it's not true in Russia. But there is a tradition to think of it that way. And it's within that tradition that each person builds their life. I'm Russian, and I know that the president isn't working for me. Whereas I'm American, and I'll be darned if my investments didn't go up since President Trump was elected, or I'm really going to benefit from that tax cut. Therefore, he's doing something for me. It's how we treat the information that we're presented, and it's our situation that makes us decide which one it is. And yes, we have in this country this tradition that's an amazing tradition, peaceful transition of power. And we just did it, by the way, and we're 2.5 years away from doing it again, all goes well. A lot of people said that would never happen, right? The people who were saying that, within a few months we'll be an authoritarian dictatorship just like Putin. Well, okay, so far that's not happening. Let's keep rooting, for it. And then we'll have one more. Quick election day story. Do I have time for a quick story? Quick. This is really good. This is a good one. I'm sorry that the person who's upset at me left, because this is a good one. So the week before, there might be other people who are upset who are saying you will fly the upset flag for her. The week before Election Day in Russia, all the state TV was, this is the dirtiest election, it's all rigged, which was echoing the things that Donald Trump was saying. One of the reasons why a lot of people want to believe that Donald Trump and the Kremlin colluded is because they sound the same, talking about the same thing. Again, that's a possible connection, not a 100% fact one. However, they were both saying the election is rigged, and the Russian TV, look at all this stuff. Obviously, Hillary Clinton will win because she's clearly the favored candidate of the deep state and the establishment, which hates Russia. And then suddenly, and on the election day, the day after election day, there was this press conference planned by the Ombudsman for Human Rights of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Human rights violations in the American elections. Well, the day rolls around, and that little press conference gets canceled, and soon that little office disappears. No longer have an ombudsman for human rights. Don't need one no more, because that guy won. And there's every reason to believe that they're sitting there in the Kremlin going, what? Who? Who won? What? Just as much as everybody else was, presumably. Actually, there's an Echo Moskwy interview where I'm predicting that Trump is going to win. A lot of people say that, but it's on tape in my case. You can go look it up. Yep. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Hello. Since the annexation of Crimea, do you think there will be any further territorial expansions by Russia?
Great question.
Or even support of independence movements like South Ossetia and others? And
what we can see, the way that Putin has set up this system of making sure that the Western alliance gets no closer and Russia ensures its sphere of influence. These wars that stake out territories within the countries that they're worried about, Georgia, Ukraine, right? That make it a frozen conflict. There's no more need to do anything in Georgia because you got it already. And Ukraine, same deal. Now, there's no way under Putin that Crimea is going back. And since our sanctions are now codified into law, that the only way they can be, the sanctions that were voted nearly unanimously by the Senate last summer, the only way they can be lifted is if Russia improves its behavior, aka give Crimea back. That's not going to happen. That thing's frozen too. Consider Ukraine a frozen issue for the next 6 years. Do they need any more? You know, what we see now, we see the war in Syria. There was a lot of interest in Putin in becoming a regional player, having that foothold in the Middle East. But where else do you go with that one? You've already got major regional powers there in Iran and Turkey. Now you have to do this negotiation. You have to, and right now it looks great for Putin because he can talk to Netanyahu, he can talk to Iran, he can talk to Turkey like nobody else can. But it also comes with all this responsibility. How much more responsibility does Putin or Russia want in the Middle East? Same deal in Europe. Where else? Having parties that question the idea of the European Union, question the idea of NATO, have influence or empower, that's good because it reduces the idea of this Europe that's expanding, right? But how much more is there for Russia to expand to? I can tell you that people in Kazakhstan have in the past talked about worrying that they're next. So far it hasn't happened. But if you're worrying about expansion of Russia, those are the questions I have to ask for you. Where else do you need to go? You know, you've got one in Moldova too, by the way. The Transnistria Republic is a frozen conflict. Russian peacekeepers. That's not going anywhere. Did I answer that? Do you think I answered that?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Just in addition, though, wouldn't you think that the Nagorno-Karabakh, which is between Azerbaijan and
Please go to the microphone, but we're not having. No. Let's get our last question.
You might have addressed it a little bit, but right now the Russian military is the only actor in Syria that has open communications with all other major belligerents. And so that, coupled with the Stada talks, the Sochi talks, has led to this idea of Russia as an alternative mediator, alternative partner. I just think it would be interesting to hear from you talking to Russians in positions of authority if Russia would even want to become an alternative mediator, alternative partner compared to the United States.
Right. Well, no, I mean, having the role is great. It helps that whole idea. Putin is the guy that was able to, using the formula of we're not going to do regime change like those messy, chaotic Americans who can't get their act together. we're going to support the legally elected president, Assad, and we're going to bring all the regional players together, and we're going to end this conflict. And that's all great right now. Now, I mean, Putin doesn't have the problem that an American president would have, in the sense that when civil society decides, hey, enough is enough in Syria, who's going to do it? Because we already talked about that. He doesn't have to listen to Parliament, etc. But there's a problem, and it just happened last week. It came out. Private military contractors who were fighting in Syria on behalf of Russian interests, a large group of them decided to take a factory that was held by Kurds and Americans, and there you have it. Apparently, there was an airstrike, a retaliated strike. If you're Russian media, you say that between 10 and 15, maybe 30, these contractors were killed. Some of the American media reports say 200. Kind of reminds me of Vietnam body counts, but whatever. A lot of Russians got killed by Americans, and we're not at war. Why? Because these contractors don't really exist. So it can't be an official event, because the Kremlin refuses to acknowledge that these guys are out there. So they're not really Russians, so it isn't really Americans really killing Russians. But it gives you an example of the problem. Now, of course, we're in conflicts where we face this problem too. Afghanistan, a sort of conflict where Americans are continuing to get, in harm's way to pursue an objective that gets more and more difficult with each year that we're there. Russia could find itself in one of those. But at the same time, people were predicting that they wouldn't even be able to bolster the Assad regime, and that's managed to sort of play out differently than everyone expected. Right now, the big problem you have is that there is the United States in there, and it is protecting its interest, and it doesn't seem to be interested in worrying about what, Iranian-backed militias are interested in doing, or Russia for that matter. So while the cards on the table right now seem to favor Putin and his ability to bring together all the players and bring peace to Syria, how that thing works out down the road, and I don't know how many more of those calamities like the one I just described that can handle. And because you were patient, frozen conflicts include the ones that go outside the borders of Russia, the Nagorno-Karabakh. That's not the only one. There are the disputes in the Fergana Valley over territory, and also regions that are ethnically fraught, like the part of Kyrgyzstan. It's part of the game when you break up the Soviet Union, a multi-ethnic, multinational empire. You break that thing up into pieces that don't necessarily fit evenly. Now you have conflict. So far, Putin has been very good at responding to that and using it as a way to consolidate rather than lose power. But it's a game that's basically, I say game not as a game, but it's a tactic that's fraught. You're not creating strength through parts that work well together, like, for example, continuously democratic elections over 200 whatever years. You're doing it based on conflict. You're hoping that the tension between Turkey and Iran supports you because Turkey and Iran can both talk to you. And that requires a lot of plates to be spinning. Putin doesn't have the pressure of a parliament and civil society to criticize him, but he does have the pressure of the fact that how many plates can he keep spinning?
Thank you.
Sure. The serious part of the conversation.
And help me thank Mr. Filipov.
Yeah.
I'm sure if any of you still have questions, he'll be glad to talk with you after the program. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you.